Today, when I'm finding new topics to write on for our writers from my websites, I can pretty much estimate how much traffic it will get. Just from experience, after publishing more than 1,000 articles over the last year. But many times I've also posted stuff that just didn't stick in Google. It just didn't give us any traffic, especially back in the days when I was not as experienced in this as I am now. And this is also something that many of you guys have questions about. Like, can we always beat Pinterest? What about if we see e-commerce sites up there in Google? Can we beat those? And so on and so on. So I want to address some of those questions in this video. So one type of article that will probably never get you any traffic in Google is when you're not meeting the search intent of that user, or the intention behind the search, you can say. So let's talk a bit about that, because it's very important to sort of get into the head of the people searching for this content. If you want to write an article and all you see up there is Pinterest, when you're checking the competition in Google, you may very well beat Pinterest, but it depends on what people are looking for. So if you are looking for a topic where people are clearly searching for images, you will probably not beat Pinterest, because that's what Pinterest is, right? It's a search engine for images, and they do that very well. And don't think that you can do that better than Pinterest, and people know that, of course. So an example here could be a topic like, are cats cuter than dogs? Because, it'll probably be some sort of image competition, and maybe you'll see Pinterest there. I didn't check, but it could be something where you could imagine that the intention behind the search would be to see a lot of cute images, right? And also, like, obviously, if people are just searching something like cute cats with hats, for example, you'll probably not be able to beat Google image search or Pinterest and stuff like that. It could also be YouTube, of course, but it's a more visual search, and they're not looking for informational content. If people were asking instead, why is it that cats are cuter than dogs, for example, then you can see the intention behind the search changed a little bit here. They're not looking specifically for pictures, they're looking for answers. And now if you see Pinterest up there, or maybe even YouTube, you'll probably be able to beat them with a good in-depth article about why that is so, and just diving into all the different aspects that's there to create the best possible article, of course. So what about e-commerce sites? What if you see like 2 or 3 e-commerce listings up there in Google and you want to know if you can go after this topic? So since we have e-commerce sites ranking for this topic that you want to write for, you really also need to pay close attention here, because if people typed in something like best watches for swimming or whatever. Let's say this e-commerce site or these e-commerce stores, they have that filter on their site. They're actually able to show people only the watches that are best for swimming. And if we're talking about huge stores here, or e-commerce stores or whatever, brands that people really trust, then you'll probably not be able to beat them either. But if nobody had that filter on the e-commerce store, let's say Google was showing just regular watches, and there was just some text on that page about that you could use this for swimming or whatever, but it's not specifically a collection of watches made for being especially waterproof or whatever, or made for diving or something like that. In that case, you can probably beat it if you do a good article where you just list the 10 best watches for diving and for swimming and to be used on the beach or whatever, something like that. So the trick here is that it's not a clear-cut answer. It's not like, okay, you can always beat Pinterest, or you can always beat this or beat that. It's much more about getting inside the head of the searcher and understanding the intention behind the search. Because if you can match that much better, and if the other sites up there are not really matching the intention behind the search, then you can typically beat it. And I want to tell you a little funny story here, because sometimes you just misunderstand the intention behind the search completely. So one article that I wrote last year was about this type of sofa and then the word clearance. And I didn't know that at the time, or was not just totally aware about it. But clearance in English can mean that you had this sale where you want to clear out a whole selection of products or stuff like that. So what people was actually looking for was a clearance sale on this type of sofa. So they were looking for cheap sofas, and I was actually writing an article about how much clearance, like sort of how much space do you need around this sofa, because this was sort of a folding type of sofa. So if you wanted to fold out this sleeping sofa, how much clearance space do you need on your floor in order, so to speak, how much space do I need in order to put the sofa here? But people were just looking for a clearance sale. So of course it never took off, this article, and never gave me any traffic. So it's just a funny example of how you can totally go off track when you're trying to get into understand what people are actually looking for. Another example here is from Go Downsize, where I wrote an article about how I work remotely from around the world. You know that we travel quite a lot, and we've been traveling all over the world, and for this article I was just using some examples from where we worked, from Thailand, and I think Nigeria we also visited, and some places in the States. And I was just sharing my personal experience about how I did that, a few tips here and there about how you can work remotely and how to get to that place in your work life and so on. But actually when you type this into Google, or I think the search term was work from anywhere in the world was the name of the article. When people were searching that, they were just looking for actual jobs and actual places where people were looking for somebody from another part of the world, so you can actually go there. So they were looking for actual jobs, and not like a guide on how to get there in your personal life and how to, arrange your life so you can work from anywhere. So I totally misunderstood the search intention here as well, and even though I wrote a pretty decent article with good tips and everything, it was not a bad article. It was like 1,300 words, and I would say in many ways it was just great with good personal pictures and so on. People were looking for something else, and a good way to sort of take a look into what people are actually looking for is to just Google the topic that you want to write about from different angles maybe. Just word it a little differently and try to look for this topic in Google and see what are Google listing up there at the top. Because Google is doing a very, very good job at knowing exactly what people are looking for in most cases. So if everything you see up there are job sites that list jobs that you can do abroad, you can do at the other end of the world or whatever, and job sites that specifically deal with this. So from looking at Google, you'll have a pretty good idea about what's the intention behind the search. And I quickly found out after I checked this that people were looking for actual jobs. So something you could do if you had this article, and something I should do, was instead of calling it work remotely from around the world, I should call it something like how to work remotely around the world, because that's an entirely different search. It's not about finding that job, it's more about how you can get there, of course. And before we head on to the next type of article that will probably never give you any traffic in Google, remember to subscribe to my channel here, because I'd love to have you a part of my community here. So the next type of article is when you're writing an article where you can simply not match the competition. If you already find good, strong websites up there doing a pretty good job about the same topic, you should just stay away. And that's also why I always tell you guys to go for underserved topics with a new site. But even with a super established site, I mean, my website godownsize.com, it's pretty high up there in domain authority and so on. If you want to look at Ahrefs metrics, it's 50 out of 100. So I can rank for a lot of stuff. There's still a lot of stuff that I cannot rank for in many years. So I wrote an article about what are the best life planning apps, like apps to help you plan your life and stuff like that. So of course this has to do with productivity and it's life tips in general, and we have a lot of major sites targeting that because there's a lot of money in that, and there's a lot of apps of course and services, just so many products around it, so the competition is sky high. And I didn't stand a chance even with Go Downsize. I couldn't get any traction to this article. I just checked in Google Analytics and I think this article drove me like 10 page views in the last 30 days. It was a complete waste of money and time to write this article. So this is especially important in the beginning when you're starting out with a new site. You absolutely need to check the competition every time. And not just think that you can beat it because there's this smaller article from a huge site. You need to find something where they are off topic, so to speak, where Google is just trying to serve something that's good enough, but it's not right there on point. If you feel like you can craft an article that's just right on point, and what you're seeing up there when you're searching for this topic is just not that. It's not that good. It's not exactly what you would be looking for. Then you should go for it. Otherwise, you will be doing an article for your site that will not give you any traffic. So what about all this content that you may have sitting on your site that's not getting any traction in Google? Should we delete it, or should we rewrite it, or what should we do about it? So I did actually go in and delete 50 articles on Go Downsize quite a few years back. And I'm not here to tell you that after I did this, it just doubled in traffic and everything was awesome. But I definitely saw an increase in traffic. So, of course, the theory here is that if you get rid of all the content that's not ranking and not doing anything for you in Google, will you have a stronger website, and will all your metrics get better in Google? And will that benefit the other articles sitting on your site that actually had some traffic, so to speak? So, because that you can say your average metrics will be better if you delete all those that are not performing well. I don't think there's any way we can say for sure, but personally, I don't want any article sitting on my site that's not doing anything. But before you rush out and delete a whole bunch of articles on your site, make sure that they had time to mature in Google. I would never delete anything on any of my sites unless they had at least a year on the site. So, because after a year, you'll have a pretty good idea about how much traffic they're going to get to your site. It's not like an article that's a 1 year old all of a sudden just starts to take off. I have yet to see that. And that is also why I went ahead and deleted a whole bunch of content a couple of years ago on Go Downsize, because I just felt like all these very, very old articles that I wrote like 4 or 5 years ago, they were not seeing any traction in Google. They had like maybe combined all these 50 articles would drive me 500 page views per month. I mean, it's a little bit of money, but in the larger picture, I wanted them out of the site, so sort of to make sure that my average statistic, my average bounce rate, my average time on site and so on would become better. And I think those are metrics that actually matters. Those are metrics we can see in Google Analytics, and of course that Google has access to. And also some of this you can also see in Google Search Console. You can see how many impressions and how many clicks you get and so on. So I think by getting rid of really old content, and I'm not talking articles you wrote like 4 or 5 months ago that are not ranking yet. They might still do very well, you just don't know it yet because it takes time. I'm talking about older content where you know for sure these articles will probably never take off. I feel confident about just deleting that old crap altogether if it's really not doing anything good for your site. So you might be wondering why I'm back in our living room here, because we were on a pretty extensive RV tour around Europe. We started in Denmark and then we started heading down in Germany, and the plan was to go all year until it got too cold in November. So actually we headed home a week ago and we've been home for a little while. We just all of a sudden felt like we wanted to go home. You know, we've been living in our small camper for 3 months. And we've seen all of Denmark, which is where we live due to the whole pandemic situation. We were supposed to go to England and just hang around south of London where we have some friends. But I mean, all of a sudden we just looked at each other like, maybe we should go home now, because it was like things were starting to shut down again due to the whole corona pandemic situation here in Denmark, and actually the city here where we live, Aarhus in Denmark. We had some new restrictions and so on, and also parts of Germany was shutting down and we couldn't head into several countries. So we felt like maybe it's just time to go home. Also because that'll give me more time to work on my course. I want to be able to film that as well as possible. And sometimes it was really hard to be out in the forest or out in the woods. And you've seen some of those videos where the sun is coming from funny angles and so on. And I had to remove the camera to a new spot and continue filming. So it was just a little stressful to go out there with a chair and the camera and all the gear to try and find somewhere where I could film outside. It's nice to be home here in the living room again, and we really enjoy that. So we're definitely not done traveling. I don't think we'll ever be done traveling. But for a few months now, we just want to enjoy being back here in the apartment. There's an actual kitchen, as you can see out here, and we have everything is just a lot more comfortable than in a camper. So there's that. So see you guys next time and have a good one.